thank you so much for joining me. Like I was saying, yeah, everybody in the community is a huge fan of all your plugins, all of your music. So it's great to kind of dig a little deeper into your process, how you came about getting into plugins and how you got into making music as well. So with these interviews, the first thing I usually like to ask is, growing up, can you remember like what sort of music you were hearing like in your house? What was the sort of music that the people you were living with were playing?
Yeah, well, so I come from like a very musical family. So my dad used to be a music journalist, and my mum's sort of been in bands their whole life and always super into music.
Sure.
So there's definitely like a bunch of stuff. Mainly, I mean, my dad would get like, because he was a music journalist, he would get like demo CDs of sort of bands that were gonna be big, but sort of basically before they were big. So we had like a huge CD collection of all kinds of stuff. But probably the band that I heard the most growing up was the Beatles. I have a classic like UK dad who's super into the Beatles and knows all kinds of like, to the point where you're wondering how you know that fact about the Beatles. Like, were you actually there?
Right. Yeah.
Like he had books about them, like super into them. Which I now am, actually, funnily enough.
Nice.
Kind of coming full circle. But yeah, lots of the Beatles. I remember I was super into the Flaming Lips album, the Yoshimi Battles of Pink Robots. Like when I grew up.
Yeah.
Apparently, I've like picked that album out when I was like 4. And I just liked the cover art, and then it turned out to be amazing.
Nice.
So lots of that. I mean, what else? A lot of kind of. In fact, I made a little list the other day because I was kind of interested to sort of put it all together. Like Gorillaz, a lot of the Beatles, Radiohead, Sparkle Horse, kind of just like classic indie rock. 2000s indie rock.
Nice. Yeah, I know. Growing up in England, my dad was obsessed with the Beatles as well. So I had all of that second-hand knowledge of the Beatles, which has made me a super fan as well.
Yeah.
And from that, were you like encouraged to like play instruments yourself when you were growing up as well?
Yeah, definitely. I remember my parents sort of got me into doing sort of piano lessons when I was 7. So pretty much since then, I've been at least playing the piano.
Sure.
And I'm sure even before then, I was kind of banging around on drums and stuff. And my dad he plays guitar, and my mum plays sort of piano.
Nice.
So there's always like guitar and piano somewhere in the house. So yeah, pretty much always doing something. I think I didn't start actually making music until, or in terms of like writing and producing and like messing with FL Studio and that kind of stuff, until I was like 16, I think.
Okay, sure. And but you were I guess you were playing instruments from a young age, and that kind of, did that like grow your interest in to start making your own music from there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think having a good understanding of the piano and kind of theory, like if you come to a door for the first time, and you have like quite an intuitive understanding of how piano works and how scales work and how chords work and stuff. Like when you see something like a piano roll, like it just instantly makes sense. You don't even question it. You're like, okay, I get it. Sure, whatever. Like you see it more as like you kind of understand where it comes from. But then I think if you were someone who came to a door and you didn't have that knowledge, it might be a little less intuitive. But definitely is like a big head start, I think, if you play piano for a bit.
And so another question I really like to ask is, like, you mentioned earlier, actually, you were talking about Flaming Lips. Can you remember like the first like music you discovered on your own? I know you had your parents' influence with the Beatles and stuff, but what was like the first like type of music that like really was something that you thought was your own kind of thing that you discovered?
Yes, so that would be like, I don't know, what would have been the first? I guess probably "Sail" by AWOL Nation.
Okay.
That was probably like around, maybe that wasn't like the first one, but that was probably like around that time, when that came out. That would have been like when I started figuring out, like, I think that was when my dad got like Spotify for the family.
Okay.
And so that was, because previously I had this iPod. It was a classic, like an iPod Classic, and it was like full of songs. Like the storage was actually pretty much maxed. It was kind of insane, and it was just all this music that my dad had. So from there, like, it's not like Spotify, but there's so much music that you still have to kind of find your own stuff. But it wasn't really. It was still curated by my parents. So I think when Spotify sort of became a thing, I kind of finally had freedom to actually go and look outside of the bounds of like what my parents had.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose, yeah, with Spotify it's like a whole new world has opened up where there's millions and millions of different, you could listen to a different song every day for the rest of your life, just going through Spotify.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, from that point, you're saying you didn't start making music, your own music, until you're like 16 or going on tours and stuff. What was it that made you want to make that jump from just listening and playing to then recording your own stuff?
I think it was just becoming aware that existed.
Okay.
Like, I don't think I even knew that FL Studio was a thing until like somehow I must have stumbled across like a YouTube video or something. Like, I don't know. I think that had never even really crossed my mind. I did.
Sure.
Actually, no, that's not true, because I did do music at school, and I remember being in year 6 and we had a Logic, but I never had a Mac at home. So I think in my brain, I never even realized that you could have it. There were other versions of Logic, basically, because I was always like, oh, I can't have that at home. That's like, you gotta have a fancy Mac.
Yeah.
I've just got my like crappy like Dell from 1998, whatever. But then I realized I could get FL Studio on it. So then I was like, oh, I can do it. And
So
that's where I started.
So FL Studio was your first door. Are you still on FL Studio now?
No, I'm Ableton.
Ableton.
I think that's the most classic timeline, is you start on FL Studio and then you switch to Ableton.
Yeah, no, I went, I was FL Studio, and then when I went to university, it was all Macs, so I went to Logic, and now everyone's on Ableton, and I'm the one fighting for Logic every day. So what's your like setup like then? Are you all in the box, or have you got a lot like hardware and stuff that you use as well?
I think pretty much all the music that I have that's released, all of that stuff is pretty much just in the box.
Okay.
Apart from like maybe plugging in a guitar or like recording an acoustic every now and then.
Sure.
But pretty much everything else, like all the drums, like none of the drums are ever recorded.
Right.
But that's all changed quite a lot in the last few months, pretty much. So I have the studio space. I live in Bristol.
Sure.
I have the studio space, which I now sort of share with my friend Ed, who's low swimmer.
Okay.
And so we have and I've been sort of buying more gear, and now I've got all of his gear and stuff. So there's a lot of hardware that I can now use, like a fully mic'd up drum kit and sort of drum machines, which I've been sort of able to splash out a bit on.
Sure.
So I've definitely been getting a lot more into the hardware workflow, which is really, I think, a bit of a game changer. I think.
Yeah. How have you noticed that, like, changing? Has it like changed your sound at all? Like using a lot more hardware stuff?
I think I've been able to sort of move away from loops a little bit more and more into kind of longer evolving things.
Okay.
It's a lot easier to do that because like if I have everything set up and I don't know, recording in like a guitar thing, it's a lot easier to make like to work, I guess, horizontally rather than vertically, if that makes sense. So I'll be able to like record a full demo because I have a drum kit there and a piano and a guitar and a synth, and they're all plugged in and they're all ready to go. So it's really easy to just record a demo of something, like a 4-track, 5-track, whatever, and then go through and be like you get the gist of how the energy of a song kind of moves throughout the whole thing.
Sure.
And then you can just spend 3 minutes playing piano over the whole thing, instead of just playing piano for like 4 bars and looping it, which I think makes quite a big difference, because then you have things that really evolve over time in very subtle ways, instead of just kind of the same loops.
Sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I noticed on your latest album, which came out this year, right?
Yeah, end of
Unfold.
July.
Is that? There were a lot more like collaborations and stuff. Was that like a conscious choice? Why did you decide to collaborate a lot more on this album?
Basically, because I suck at finishing things. And
Okay.
It's so much easier to just be like, hey, I'm just gonna send it to this person and see what they do, and then when I get it back, it's gonna sound new and fresh again.
Sure.
And it's gonna be way easier to just tie up the loose ends and wrap it up and finish it. So for pretty much all of them, I made all the initial ideas.
Right.
And then I would sort of get to the point where I'd kind of heard it one time too many, because I think I used to listen to my demos a lot, which is something I try and not do so much now.
Sure.
But I would just sort of listen to it too much. And then I would send it to someone, and they would add something really exciting and new, and then suddenly it would feel like a whole new thing, and then the kind of creativity gets reignited.
Sure. And how did you like decide who you were going to send those initial ideas to? How did you decide who you wanted on each track?
I think there was always kind of a rough, like, for example, for like Fire, I knew that I wanted some kind of strings on there.
Sure.
And I was like, who do I know the strings? An amazing string player called Annie Elise. So I just sent it to her and was like, do you want to put some strings on this and see what happens? I think I kind of always roughly had an idea from the mood of the initial idea that I made.
Sure.
Or I would just really want to work with a certain person because I really admired them and I thought they were really cool. They made great music, and so I would just send them a bunch of stuff and then say, like, you pick, basically.
Right. Yeah, no, I thought it's great. I think it's a great way to work. Like, we get so used to sitting in our little rooms making our music. It's nice to it's nice to get in the studio with people and do it, but if you can't do that, it's nice to send it out to people and see where they're going to take your beginning.
But it's
ideas.
almost like a superpower that, like, being on the sort of internet online community, it's like you can't quite be in a studio with them, but you can get pretty close. But also the amount of people that you have available is huge. Like, it's as big as you want it to be. Basically, you can reach out to so many people. Whether or not they'll actually respond to you is a whole other thing. But you can, and in theory, you can collaborate with pretty much everyone.
Yeah. No, it's an incredible time to be a musician, I think. Another question that I like to ask, actually, because we have a lot of producers listening to the podcasts and stuff. What are, like, outside of your own plugins, obviously, what are your go-to plugins that you use on all of your music? And also, do you use your own plugins a lot?
That's a good question. I find it hard sometimes to use my own plugins.
Okay.
Mainly because I know them a bit too well.
Right.
And if I open up my own plugin, it's like, oh, now I'm in plugin mode, which is kind of my day job.
Sure.
I've been looking at this thing for like 9 hours today. I want to like do something else.
Do you
But
notice?
sometimes I do.
Like, I know with like music, if you listen to your own music, you're always like, oh, actually, I could have done that better. With your plugins, do you like notice something and think, oh, I should have done this? Right.
I'll be using it and I'll be like, oh, actually, this could be like 3 pixels over here, and then I'll like switch into my code editor and I'll be like, wait, no, I was supposed to be making music right now.
No, I get that.
Yeah, but in terms of plugins that I do use, I mean, obviously there's all the sort of boring ones like Pro Q3, use that all the time. Like FabFilter, like basically all the FabFilter stuff. Recently, I've been there's this company called Clevgrand, which makes some really cool plugins.
Yeah, they're amazing.
I really like how sort of modular they are. Like they all kind of do one thing really well.
Sure.
And they're all kind of fun, which is really important, I think. And what else have I been using a lot? Just sort of like Contact Instruments.
Okay.
I've been using quite a lot.
Nice.
The SWAM stuff is really cool. The like physical modeling.
Oh yeah.
Sort of like violins and cellos and all kinds of instruments.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been getting into that, trying to use it more, basically.
I need to check check those ones out. Talking of Clevergrand, glad you brought them up. We've got a remix competition next week, and they're doing the prizes for that. So everyone come back for that. I love their plugins as well. Really
I just
nice
bought
stuff.
a bunch of them today because they're
all on sale, aren't they?
So, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so coming back to like you making music, I just wanted to know like what's your like kind of routine when like, do you have like a routine which you go to every time when you're starting a track? Like, do you start with drums or with a melody, a sample or something, or does it really just depend on the day?
I think it depends on the day, but the one thing I don't do, which I know a lot of other people do, is starting with drums.
Okay.
Just because I think like melody kind of excites me a little bit more.
Sure.
I think that's basically it. I think I kind of try and let it be as freeform as possible.
Sure.
Basically just like what's exciting me, or maybe I'll be on the way to the studio and I'll listen to an album and I'll be like, oh, I really like the way that they did this synth thing, and so the first thing I do when I get in is I'll be like, oh, I'll try and do something similar.
Sure.
And see where it goes from there.
Nice. Yeah. I hear a lot of people saying that they don't like doing that. They don't like listening when they're working on an album or on music. They don't like to listen to other music because they feel like it kind of
No, I do agree. I think like I'll listen to something like on the way, and then as soon as I get into the studio I'll be like trying to just listen to my own stuff, because it's such an unfair comparison. You're comparing like a half-baked idea to a mixed and mastered. Like it's never going to sound even remotely as good.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I'm exactly the same now. I'll always listen to as much as I can, trying to get that inspiration basically. But yeah, now I just want to move on to like talk a little bit about the plugins. But before I do that, actually, I had a question from Zach Maxo. I'm guessing you guys know each other, right?
Yeah.
His question is, how do you get your hair looking so lush?
Well,
what are the secret routines?
Sadly, there are not many secret routines. The main thing is I don't really probably look after it very well. I just sort of let it do its thing, and it seems to be happy about it. So
nice. Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd throw that in because he'd be mad if I don't ask that. But yeah, moving on.
Cantu is the secret.
Okay, Cantu. Oh, I have to check it out.
It's good stuff.
So yeah, moving on to your plugins. So your first plugin was the piano, Imagiro piano, which came out. I was trying to find out when that came out. A few years ago now. When actually did it come out?
I think it was April 2020.
Okay, so 3 years ago, around.
Yeah, like 3.5 years ago. That's insane.
What was it that made you decide to make a plugin, and why did you decide to make the plugin that you did?
Well, so I've always been really into programming.
Okay.
For pretty much longer than I've been doing music.
Sure.
I think since I was like 12, basically doing like trying to host a Minecraft server. I think that was the first like bit of programming I ever did, and ever since then I was like super hooked.
Nice.
So I've always been doing that, and then I've also always been doing music stuff. So I always thought like at some point I'm gonna make plugins, because that just is the most obvious thing to do if I am into both of these things. Like, why would I not do that? But then I kept kind of putting it off because I think I was kind of, not that I necessarily put it off, but it's kind of it's not a very obvious thing to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're trying to write a website nowadays, there are like a billion YouTube videos and things to help you get into that. It's the easiest thing. You just basically need any kind of way of text editing, which every computer has.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a little bit more intimidating to get into plugins. So I think that's why it took me a while. But so I always had that in the back of my mind, and I went to uni to do computer science, and then I did that for like the first year, and then in the second year, the pandemic hit in 2020, and I went back to live with my parents. And at my parents' house is a piano, and it's the piano that I basically grew up practicing on.
Right.
And we got it from from my primary school actually, which is like down the road.
Oh wow.
When we first moved to England, when I was like 8,
Right.
they were giving it away. Like it used to be the school piano, so it's been like played by kids for years basically.
Nice.
And I had like little pieces of tape with all the letters on it and stuff. So yeah, I went home for lockdown, and then it was just great having a piano there that I could record. It was just really nice, and I kind of wanted to take it with me because I knew that I was going to go back to uni eventually.
Sure.
So I just kind of recorded it and made a little Ableton rack, because you can do that in the Ableton sampler.
Okay.
You can kind of put together a sample instrument. It's a bit clunky. I don't really know why they chose to do it the way they did, because you end up with these like tiny little things that you have to drag with your mouse, and it's sort of really painful.
Right.
But yeah, so I made that and kind of put it on my Discord,
Okay.
just as like a free thing if anyone wanted to download it. And then I just sort of thought, hey, this is like so close to being a plugin. Like if there's any point where I got to just push myself over the line, it's now, because it's like this is the prime thing.
Sure.
So that was basically how I started. Was like, oh, I might as well just make this into a plugin, and just sort of like I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna make it really cheap and just sort of put it up online and see what happens.
Sure.
So I did that, and turns out loads of people wanted a cheap piano plugin that wasn't Spitfire Labs, basically.
Yeah. And how did you record it? How did you get it to sound?
Yeah,
like?
so I had pretty much the only mics that I had at the time were these 2 Rode M5s.
Okay.
It's like if you Google like what are the best sort of small diaphragm condenser mics to get that are sort of cheap, that's what always comes up, because it's just like a classic, like it's a good budget option. You can get a matched pair for like $200 or something.
Oh, nice.
And they sound great for that. So I just had those, but I put like a blanket over the strings of the piano.
Sure.
Which like massively muffled the sound in a really nice way. It's kind of like felt, but it's just to the extreme, because the blanket was like twice as thick as a piece of felt.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically it. I had these 2 Rode M5s. They were quite wide, which is why it's got like a really crazy stereo image. And then yeah, just blanket over the strings.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was wondering why it sounded like that.
It is a bit difficult though when you, so when you sample it, because when you get a piano felted, it's like a semi-expensive thing to do, because they have to make sure that the felt is like lined up properly and it's the right thickness, because otherwise when you play some of the notes, you might need to play some of them more than you would otherwise if the felt's a bit thicker there, to make it sound even with all the other ones.
Sure.
Obviously this was just some random blanket that I kind of draped over, so I had to record a lot of the notes like loads of times to make them actually play loud enough that they would ring, but also quiet enough that it was soft. So it's kind of a lot of trial and error, basically.
Yeah. How did you come up with the idea of like putting a blanket over it? Was that like the first idea that came to your head, or did you try some other stuff?
Well, I tried. So I knew that I wanted to put something over the strings and make something kind of unique sounding, because I've always been into this guy called Hauschka, who he does these like prepared piano performances, which are really cool, where his whole thing, he'll put like ping pong balls in the piano, and he'll tape like tic tac boxes to some of the strings, and it'll become this super cool percussive instrument. So I knew that the fact that I had the physical piano there, I could do stuff which I couldn't do in software, which was physically messing with it. So I was like, I'm going to put some stuff over it. So I tried with t-shirts first. And that was good, but that was kind of, I don't know, for some reason that made it even more plucky and percussive, just because of the nature of a t-shirt, I guess, because there was like 2 layers of material instead of 1.
Sure.
But then, yeah, I just kind of was experimenting with different stuff around the house, and then I found a blanket which was like the right amount of thickness.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I always wondered why it sounded like that, but yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then moving on from that, actually no, sticking with that, how did, like, obviously so many people within the like lo-fi or chill hop sort of community, and even broader than that, use your piano. So how did you manage to like get it to spread so far? Was it all like word of mouth?
Yeah, I mean, the basic answer to your question is yeah, it was just all word of mouth, which is still crazy to me. Like I never did any kind of advertising push. I never spent any money on it.
Sure.
I mean, I think so when I first posted about it, so if you know Laxity, who's an amazing producer, I remember that he reposted it really early on, like straight after I put it out, and he had like a bunch more followers on Twitter than I did, and that like I just remember after he reposted it, like it sort of started building some traction.
Nice.
So I think just due to the nature of Twitter and how sort of viral things can get, I think that really helped. I think, I mean, I always think about this as like, why did it actually do so well? Because I need to figure that out because I don't really know. But I think it's just that it hit kind of a gap in the market, which a lot of people were looking for, which is something that is, I mean, everyone wants to have a good piano sound, right? Because a piano is such a classic thing and it works across so many genres and everyone knows what a piano sounds like. Like you want a good piano sound, and especially for sort of like chill hop sort of stuff, or I guess anything laid back, having a nice really soft sound with a lot of texture, a lot of people want that basically. And the only ways of getting that was the Spitfire Labs one, which is free, which is fantastic, and loads of people were using that. But you know, it does leave some stuff to be desired. It's still good, but it's a very mellow, it's a very dark sound. Actually. And it's hard to get like a nice high end out of it. So there's not a ton of customization either. So basically, it's like that was kind of a free version. And then if you wanted to upgrade in sort of soft piano terms from that, a lot of your other options are like you got to buy the whole keyscape just to get the one like felted preset, or you got to get like Piano Tech or something, and all of these kind of sound like if you bought like a Roland keyboard with some preset sounds, like the piano sound where it's like really bright and tinny, like they all kind of, it didn't really sound like that, but like they could have had a little bit more character, I think. So I think it just happened that there weren't a ton of other plugins that were like cheap and just did that one thing. And I think being obviously the fact that I am also an artist, it kind of like validates it a little bit, I guess, because it's like, I would use this.
For sure. I've seen so many artists releasing plugins, and you can tell it's just like, how am I going to make some more money? I'm just going to release this random plugin that is just I got someone to make for me. But it sounds like it was like a labor of love that you made yourself. So that's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm lucky to be in the position where I can do both things, and like the music and the plugins can both inform each other.
Makes sense. And then moving to this year then, so a few months ago you released your new plugin, which is Autochroma, which is a granulizer, right? What was the thinking behind doing that as the next plugin, because it's obviously so different from the first one?
I think actually where it came from was what we were talking about before, which is that I wanted to make a plugin that I could actually use, that I wasn't like sick of by the time I released it. And so what's cool about making, so it's not like a granulizer in the classical sense where you put a sample in and then it plays across the keyboard. It's like specifically granular effects. So it relies on the audio that's coming in, like a continuous stream of audio, and then it does sort of granular stuff on top of that. So I wanted to make something that was an effect. So when it's an effect, it can basically be applied to infinite things because you can just stick it on whatever. And I didn't really, I still don't really have any, I never studied DSP, so like digital signal processing. So like I couldn't make a good EQ or a saturator or like a compressor. I mean, I could make like basic versions of all of these, but they wouldn't be better than what you could buy. And a granulizer is kind of the perfect thing to make because it doesn't rely on any of that stuff. It's kind of just about playing stuff back in different ways. And what it's really about is the user interface, because kind of you can make a granulizer and it has a billion controls because it's such a fine-tuned thing. Like you're controlling hundreds of little grains and they're all going back and forth in different directions, and it's really the challenge is like, how do you control all of that and how do you make it fun without taking away too much control? And that's kind of the part that I find interesting, is like building the interfaces and thinking about how you interact with the software and how it guides you musically and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So it always seemed like the right thing to do. And then I just sort of for fun, I just made a little prototype one day. I was like, oh, I'll just sort of try and make a granulizer. And then I sort of ended up at the end of the day having made an actual prototype. And I was like, oh, that was actually, in my head, this was like an impossible task. And I've like not done it, but I've made something.
Sure.
In a day. So I'm like, oh, this is actually going to be something that's achievable. It took, a year later, but then I actually finally made something.
Right. And a lot of people have said actually, but listening to like Arnau, like Londacy's raves about like the UI. Like, how did you come up with the design for the plugin? 'Cause, yeah, it looks amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error is the main thing. But also I knew roughly the feeling that I wanted it to have, which is I wanted it to embrace the fact that it's very digital instead of try and hide from that with like, 3D designs and all that kind of stuff. Like a granulator is inherently a digital effect. It doesn't exist in the analog world. So, I wanted to like hone into that as much as possible. But then also I wanted it to feel kind of a bit alive, I guess. Right. And the thing that I saw that has done a really good job of that is this game called Nier Automata, like Nier Automata or something.
Okay.
And it's this game, and it feels like the UI is very like techie looking, but in a kind of, someone described it as e-paper.
Okay.
So it's like, how e-paper is digital, but because it doesn't, like a Kindle, for example, like it doesn't have, I mean, you can turn on a backlight, but let's just not think about that for a second.
Sure.
Where it kind of looks just like a physical thing. It doesn't look like a screen.
Right.
And yet it has sort of digital stuff going on at the same time. So basically I wanted it to feel like e-paper, basically, like you were looking at a Kindle. So like lots of sharp, crisp lines and like the kind, like it's very off-white. It's not even off-white. It's basically just beige, like background color.
Sure.
So yeah, I knew that I wanted to kind of aim for something like that. And then, so some stuff was very directly inspired by Nier Automata. Like on the bottom left, where you choose between the 3 sort of grain streams, there's like a little indicator that shows you which one you're on. And that's like pretty much plucked from like a Nier Automata UI. Like I've modified it a bit, but like that's kind of my way of paying homage.
I have to check that out for sure.
Yeah, super interesting. That and kind of so I grew up basically with the Nintendo DS. That was like my one game console that I had.
Sure. Classic.
And the UI on that is it's that similar feeling where it's kind of that like 2010 sort of like techie thing.
Yeah.
Where it feels kind of techie, but it's got a lot of like fun to it at the same time. And it's very intricate, but it's not over the top.
Yeah. No.
So I think that hits the spot really nicely, because I think since then it's gone a lot more into kind of a lot of design trends have gone into sort of minimalism,
right?
Which I think is cool, but also I liked the attitude that they came to it with on the DS, where it's like, yeah, we're gonna just like chuck a bunch of stuff in there, but it's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what I want to do with it as well.
That's very Nintendo, I guess.
Yeah.
Always fun. Phantom Power in the chat, she says, when is dark mode coming?
Dark mode is already there.
It's already there. So yeah,
I should make a manual, but I just haven't got around to it yet. But yeah, if you hit the little menu next to the preset thing, and then you can change the theme, but you do have to restart the plugin.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Already
there.
Maybe one day there will be customizable themes, if I can get around to that too.
Oh, that'd be sick. Yeah. One question actually that I thought would be kind of perfect to ask you, as someone who studied computer science, what are your thoughts on like AI in music? you see it as like a positive or as like a negative? Are you using any sort of AI in the stuff that you do?
I'm not yet, but interestingly, so I did a dissertation which was using AI. I think like the main thing about it is that it's just another tool like all other tools.
Sure.
It's just can be incredibly powerful. And you know, music today isn't reliant on how good your tools are.
Sure.
Like you don't listen to a song and you're like, oh, that synth is like if a synth sounds really good, it's probably because they dialed in some cool patch, you know. It's not necessarily because it just was an expensive synth, which, although to be fair, that can be the case. Still, I think my point still stands that it's what you do with the tools and how that like tells a story rather than the tools themselves. But yeah, so I did this dissertation and it was about basically listening to a bunch of piano sounds, like piano performances, and being able to like essentially like imagine you had a recording of someone playing piano. The idea was that you'd be able to take that recording, feed it into an AI, and it would sort of be able to turn into a plugin of that specific piano.
Okay. That'd be sick.
And without necessarily sampling every note, it would kind of figure out what the notes in between would be that it didn't hear. And it almost worked, to be fair. It was like a project I did for like 6 months, so it wasn't like fully fleshed out. It almost worked. But I think that's a good example of like, yeah, it can make a piano sound, but it's still, you know, you can have the most expensive piano in the world and you still need someone good to play it to make a good recording. And I think with AI, that's even more apparent because the reason we listen to music is to connect to other humans, and I don't think that will ever change. So personally, I'm not really worried, but I know that for a lot of people, for example, someone who I share the studio with, he works on his sort of day job is doing library music.
Okay.
And that kind of affords him to be able to then take the creative time to himself. But if you don't have those openings, then you're not allowing people to be in the middle, essentially, where you're not like just doing it for fun and you're not doing it to be a pro. To be like chart topping. He's kind of in the middle, which is where most of us are. And if you have something like AI that does all the library music for you, you're not going to be able to pay the bills to then be able to be creative in your own time. So I think for me, that's like if you imagine someone who's just done a degree in graphic design and they come out of uni and, you know, they just want an entry-level job. Like there's no entry-level jobs anymore because AI is going to, you know, take over all of them. So I think that's really where the danger is, because then they don't have the chance to become really good.
Sure. Yeah, I've never really thought of it like that. That makes complete sense. Yeah, a lot of those jobs are going to disappear, aren't they? Because the computers will do it for us. But again, I can see the positives, I can see the negatives. A question in the chat actually from, where's it gone? From Chloe. What other plugins would you like to make? Have you got any ideas of what's next? I know you've only just put out the second plugin, but have you got any ideas what you'd like to do?
No, I'm kind of forcing myself not to think about it too much right now because I kind of want to work on music for a little bit more. But I'm sure that there will be some things that come to me. Like I've had a few ideas. I have this prototype which I kind of spent ages on and never really did anything with, which is like a physics-based MIDI sequencer.
Okay.
So it's kind of like you press a note and it comes in as like this bouncy ball, and every time it collides with something, it plays that note. And then you can hook that up to like whatever you want, like a Rhodes or a plugin or whatever. Sure. It's just outputs MIDI. But then, I like the idea of sort of doing physically simulated something. Right. Because it feels more unpredictable in a way that plugins are very predictable. But then the difficulty there is like, how do you make that work within the workflow of a DAW, where you can like rewind time and fast forward it? And basically that, I think that's something where I got to that point and I was like, oh, now this is actually quite difficult to figure that out. Sure. So maybe that'll be the next thing. I think I'm probably just going to make whatever the next things are probably going to be quite small, just sort of doing one simple thing. Like there's a plugin called the Shallow Water, which
I don't know.
it's very subtle. It just adds a bit of sort of pitch wobble and sort of filter to stuff, but it makes it kind of gives life to like if you have a very synth sound and you put it on, it kind of just subtly wobbles stuff to make it. So I think maybe just something small like that would be the next thing.
Interesting.
But definitely in experimenting territory.
Yeah. Do you get a lot making music? Are you ever like? Because I sometimes get it, and I don't have the brain, or I don't have the know-how of how to make plugins and stuff. But do you get where there's something that you're like, oh, I wish this could do this? Do you ever have that where you just quickly make something and I'll do it, and that you can do?
Yeah, like so I have like a ribbon mic that's mid-side, so it's like an XY, and if you play something in kind of mid-side configuration, you need to sort of convert that to left-right.
Sure.
And it's a really simple thing, and I'm sure there's 100 plugins that do it, but I didn't have one that was just like straight up, you just click a button, you just put the plugin on, and it just does it. So I was like, oh, I'll just make it. That did seem pretty cool.
That must be amazing. Amazing. There's a question here. I feel like I'm missing a joke from Lagalot, and he says, could you ask him what the chance of rain is over the next couple of months? That's lost on.
Hopefully it's quite rainy.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. I'm not even gonna justify him by explaining that one.
Right. Another question we had from someone on Instagram was, what does your like weekly routine look like? Are you doing music full time now?
Yeah, well, at the moment, yeah. So definitely, sort of income-wise, it's split between plugins and music.
Sure.
But I think because I've just had this big plugin release, and I've just been working loads to get that done, I definitely want to sink more time into music. So yeah, that's basically right now. That's what I'm doing. It's just music full time.
Sure. And have you got any? No, sorry, you go.
No, I was just gonna say. So now and then, if I'm feeling too lazy to go to the studio, because it's like a 25-minute cycle, which really is nothing, but I'm just a lazy person sometimes, then I can just sit on my laptop at home and do a bit of plugin stuff.
Sure. And you're in Bristol, right? Did you say?
Yeah.
And what's the scene like there? Are a lot of people that you like work with on music there, or is it still more like online and stuff?
There's definitely a lot of people. I think what's cool about Bristol is it's not got obviously the same level of buzz that I guess London has.
Sure.
But in terms of like the proportion of the number of people to the number of musicians is absolutely massive. Right. So if you do go out and like there's lots of shows playing and there's so many musicians, pretty much everyone that I know plays some instrument or is in some band or does something. Sure. So yeah, it's definitely very saturated with creative people, which is really cool. Nice.
And are you from Bristol originally, or?
No, so me and my family moved to Bath, which is like a 10-minute train from Bristol, when I was 7. Okay. So I've always been like close by.
Yeah. I mean, you were at university there, or?
I went to uni in Southampton.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I did try and get into Bristol, but I just about missed the grade, so I had to get into Southampton on clearing.
It's a tough one.
Which was a stressful day, so that's another story. Yeah.
We won't talk too much about that. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions in the chat. Oh, so Phantom Power says, would you rather have a session with Damon Albarn or Tom York?
Oh, Tom York. I'm sorry. Yeah? There's zero hesitation on that one.
Big Radiohead fan.
Huge Radiohead fan.
Yeah.
I grew up basically on Kid A, and now I'm kind of in the last few months. It was Radiohead was one of those bands that was like, oh, my parents always listen to them.
Sure.
So and I know that they're great. Like everyone has those bands that they know are great, but they just never really listen to, just for whatever reason. You never have that moment of being like, oh, I'm actually going to sit down and like listen to Elvis Presley or something like that, where it's just like such a name that you don't even think to go and listen to them. But then probably in the last few months, I've actually been going back to it, and it's this weird thing because like when I listen to the intro for Idiotech, like my mum must have listened to that song loads when I was in the womb or something, but like it just like triggers some kind of deep memory inside of me. And I know that my mum used to, I mean, it came out when I was born in like 2000.
Sure.
So definitely right now, especially, I'm going through a huge Radiohead moment.
Okay.
So definitely, not say I don't love Gorillaz.
Yeah,
definitely Radiohead.
Yeah, and I think I've asked all the questions I'm going to ask. There's one comment I wanted to read out quickly before. Oh no, I lost my Twitch. So Sumrumi says, I just want to say, as a software engineer, knowing the work that's involved, that we're super grateful just how affordable the plugins are and how accessible they are to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to hear that, because that was definitely the goal. And even like to be honest, I don't even want to fully take credit in that way, because it's sort of somewhat selfishly motivated, especially with the latest plugin, of making it cheaper and making it accessible, because I think if it's something that a lot of people can use, and it's something that a lot of people get to use because of the price, it's more likely that that's going to have a knock-on effect to other people, and people are going to recommend it, and it's going to be something that a lot of people get to use, basically, which is kind of the goal, is to make something like, you don't want to make something and only, even if it funds you, if it's like only the 10 richest producers in the world can use it.
It's true.
Like, there's not a lot of satisfaction in there. My way of making money before plugins was streams, and as I'm sure any producer can tell you, like you end up checking the Spotify for Artists app like every day. Like, numbers become the biggest thing in the world.
Sure.
So yeah, it's cool. It's really cool to have so many people using it. So I'm super grateful.
Yeah, and a testament to how like popular it is. I was editing a Sleepy Fish stream thing for our YouTube earlier, and he was using the Imagiro piano. So everywhere I look,
I gotta give it up to Sleepy Fish. I gotta say, one of the biggest Imagiro piano patrons.
There you go. But yeah, no, thank you so much for joining me for the first ever like live interview we've done. For those that haven't checked out the plugins yet, go and check them both out. It's Imagiro, right? The website is
yeah. Imagiro with a dot before the R.
Yeah, and then obviously as well, go, and if you haven't checked out Imagiro's, I'm guessing if you're here, you have checked out his music, but newest album Unfold is out now. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. It's been really fun.